So I struggled for years trying to get my glutes to grow, but it wasn't until I checked myself and my training that I was able to finally get them to go from this to this. Now, it definitely wasn't just my training that I changed, so I'm gonna be going over the 5 things that I think made the biggest impact that allowed me to make such significant growth and add over 10 inches to my glutes. I absolutely saw growth in my glutes when I started changing, but I realized now looking back that a lot of that was just due to the fact that I was introducing a novel stimulus. And what was actually happening is I was going through body recomposition, which is where I saw an increase in muscle mass, but I also saw a decrease in my body fat percentage, which is very common among novice lifters. So I did see some growth at that time, but it wasn't as significant as I wanted it to be. And it wasn't until I went into a surplus or my calories were exceeding my maintenance calories that I was able to see significant growth. Now I have to put a couple caveats in here. How significant of growth you can see is going to be very dependent on genetics. Some people are able to just start training and see inches and inches of growth. And that's just because they are genetically set up in a way that they're maybe going to carry more fat in that area, or they have a pelvic structure that allows for more significant glute growth. For me, I was not seeing the level of growth that I wanted to when I was eating closer to my maintenance calories. So when I did finally go into that surplus and make some adjustments to my training, I was able to see significant changes. I should also note that protein intake is going to be a vital component of this process. Typically for muscle building in particular, we want to have at least 0.8 grams per pound of body weight on a daily basis. Around the same time that I went into a surplus, I also made some major changes to my training. For many, many years, I had avoided compound movements for fear that my legs were going to grow more significantly than my glutes. Come to find out that it's also very hard to grow glutes at all if you're not incorporating those compound movements. Now, I did just do a video, the one just previous to this one, I'll link it on the screen, that went over the specific exercises that I started implementing. But I would just want to emphasize that using a combination of isolation movements and compounds is going to be the recipe for the most growth. Yes, your legs are going to grow. The glutes are part of your leg. They work in tandem with the quads and the hamstrings in order to perform hip extension. So they're going to grow. That's part of the process. You can minimize the growth of the hamstrings and the quads to a degree by focusing on glute bias variations of these movements, but ultimately they're going to grow. So if you're trying to see significant glute growth, you're going to have to accept that. Otherwise, stick to your isolation movements and settle for more minimal growth. Good exercise selection typically is not enough on its own. We also have to focus on training intensity and how challenging those movements are when you're actually performing them. Understanding training intensity is a skill, and it's not something that you're going to master overnight. I think it's something that most people need to take time to develop. Most people don't understand their true failure point. They don't understand, if they're performing a set to 10 reps, they don't necessarily know once they get to that 10th rep how many reps they have left in the tank. And that's an important skill to develop, but it's important to also know it's not going to develop overnight. When you first start training, just like I did, you're probably going to see progress no matter what you're doing, no matter what exercises or what intensity level you're training at. People tend to experience plateaus though when they are no longer experiencing a novel stimulus, meaning they've been doing this for a little while and their body has adapted to the introduction of these exercises. This is where your training intensity and number of quality sets needs to increase. More often than not, people want to focus on doing more, where I would suggest that you actually focus more on quality over quantity. So instead of adding more sets, instead of adding more exercises, depending on what your starting place is, I say focus on really quality sets. Focus on starting to approach failure on some of your sets, on some of your exercises. Now, I know there's a lot of language going on right now about the fact that you need to train to failure. And this isn't necessarily untrue, but it's also not necessarily the case that you have to take every single set on every single exercise to failure. It also can be incredibly hard to recover from if it's a new concept to you, if you've never performed exercises to complete failure. So my suggestion is to start testing out taking 1 or 2 of your sets of 1 or 2 of your exercises to failure, and then gradually increasing the number of times you do that while your body is adjusting to this increase in intensity. Failure can be defined a few different ways, but for our purposes, we're going to be focusing on facilitating muscle growth while also preventing potential injury. When it comes to failure, you want to train until the point where you can no longer maintain good form integrity. Now, in my opinion, there's gonna be a little bit of form breakdown whenever you're training at a really high intensity. Whenever you're training with really heavy weight that's gonna take you close to a failure point, there's gonna be a little bit of form breakdown. In my opinion, that's okay, especially if you've mastered technique. Now, if you're very new to this, first of all, I wouldn't even necessarily say that you need to train to failure. But if you're very new to this and you haven't mastered a movement, I don't suggest taking a movement to a point where you see form breakdown, because you will not necessarily know how to maintain enough form, enough quality form, in order to prevent significant breakdowns. What we want to do is we want to be training to between 1 to 4 reps from that failure point for the majority of our working sets. Again, if you typically are training 5, 6, 7 reps from failure, don't start by doing all of your exercises and all of your sets to that 1 to 4. Start with 1 or 2 so that you can gradually adjust to this experience of training to failure. Then over time, you can gradually increase the number of sets you take close to failure, or you can increase the number of exercises you take close to failure. My suggestion is to start with isolation movements. This is your hip thrusts, this is your kickbacks. If we're talking about other muscle groups, this is gonna be your bicep curls, your tricep extensions, things that only typically utilize one major joint, so that there's less components going on that you have to focus on when it comes to maintaining your form integrity. Okay, by and large, the most underestimated component of muscle growth is going to be your recovery. Muscle growth or hypertrophy actually doesn't occur when we're actively training. It occurs after we finish training and the muscle is recovering from the stimulus that you introduced it to. That means that it's just as important to prioritize your recovery as it is to prioritize your training itself. Recovery factors that you need to prioritize are gonna be sleep, water intake, consuming enough calories, and consuming enough protein. Without these factors in check, progress may be slowed even with 100% effort in the gym. Something that I know nobody wants to hear is that the most important part of muscle building is time. You cannot change how long it's going to take to build muscle. Now, you can build it more rapidly, but at the end of the day, muscle takes a long time to build. For women, you're gonna build maximum a pound of muscle per month, and that's across your entire body. That means in order to see significant visual changes, we need to be very consistent with all of these factors that I mentioned before for a very long period of time. I have seen 10 inches of growth on my glutes over the course of 10 years. However, I think if you implement a lot of these tips that I was not implementing for the first 5 or 6 years of my training, you're gonna see that growth a heck of a lot faster. Okay, if you've stuck around for the whole video, thank you for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and let me know what kind of content you're looking for. If you like this more educational content, or if you prefer more lifestyle content, just let me know.